So I love this. Knowing that peak information is mind blowing. Literally bawling, she says in the chat.
Oh.
Okay, so are you willing to do the like reflex points?
Yes, I absolutely. Okay, guys, I'm going to put my foot up on the camera, so just bear with me. So another way to help disengage the fight or flight response is to activate a pressure point that helps calm the vagus nerve. So that was that curve I just explained to you guys. Okay. And this is really helpful for chronic stress, acute stress, insomnia. Really, really great if you have trouble sleeping, to hold this point on each foot for about 30 seconds every night before bed. And eventually you'll start to notice a difference. I've literally had clients go from like 2 hours a night for 20 years to sleeping 8-hour nights within a month. So good stuff. Okay. So I always laugh when I get to this part of anything. So when you look at your foot, the ball of your foot has a little bit of a color change just right here. You can kind of follow the curve. And right along that curve is the reflex for your diaphragm. So a lot of us are chest breathers. We breathe right up into here, not into our bellies. And our diaphragm, which goes right across our rib cage, is really tense, really tight, and prevents us from getting deep breaths. That triggers the nervous system into thinking we're in danger. So working on that line across the ball of the foot will help to loosen and relax the diaphragm so that you can take deeper breaths to begin with. Right at the center of that here is the solar plexus or vagus nerve reflex. So by pushing on that until it hurts a little bit, not excruciatingly, but like push on it until you feel something, and just hold that for as long as you want. But I would say at least 30 seconds your first couple of times. Just helps to calm that, like that major nerve that gets overactivated or shuts down. So it brings it back online, calms it down. It's really helpful. And then another reflex that's good for chronic stress is the adrenal gland reflex. So that's where we produce adrenaline. There's a whole other cycle. I'm not going to get into that right now. But if you activate the reflex, it helps to calm the adrenals down. And basically what reflex points do is it forces the brain to focus in on that organ or that body part. And it's like, oh, that needs more resources. I'm going to help it out. So the adrenal reflex is can be a little bit difficult to find, but basically if you just draw a line down between your first two big toes until you get below the diaphragm reflex and just move over to the side a bit, poke around, because it's a little different in everyone, but it's right around here, and you'll find a really sore spot. Or a lot of people notice that it feels almost like a little pebble. And if you push on that, it will help to kind of disengage the adrenal gland stress response, which chemically helps to reset that fight or flight response. Those would be the big ones. And I'll send you a PDF with that as well, Robin, so you can post those two diagrams.
So and I notice sometimes when I'm doing a pedicure and I'm massaging around in that area, I either get the response of like, obviously you're getting your feet rubbed either way, but sometimes in the adrenal gland spot that you just mentioned, they'll jump, like it hurts. So is that because it's overstimulating that area, or is it because they have some issue there?
So from a reflexologist standpoint, when it hurts, it means it needs more attention.
Okay, that's what I figured.
So when I get to I don't do a ton of reflexology anymore, like one-to-one with people, but if I am and I get to a point that is sore on their foot, like I might lighten the pressure so I'm not torturing them, depending on the person. Some people are okay with the pain, right? But I stay focused on that point until the pain starts to ease. And that is a great analogy for life, guys, because our tendency is, oh, that hurts. Step away, move away. Don't go into that, right? Whether it's physical pain or emotional pain, that tends to be our reaction in Western society. It's not that way across the world. And so lean into the discomfort a little bit.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So one more question that I would have about like the reflex points, especially because just through like my own self-education and my experiences with oils myself and with my kids, the big toe and cedarwood specifically, pushing it into their big toes, I do notice a huge difference in how quickly they fall asleep and how long they fall or how long they sleep for. So, and that's supposedly like the connection to the brain and
the tips of the toes are the brain reflexes.
Okay, so if you're using an essential oil with the reflex points, does it enhance the effects or make them quicker? Or is it like, what is it doing?
So, I mean, basically the way that the reflex works is there's all of these different nerves that connect, right? So like they've done studies that show when they push on the kidney reflex in the foot, the kidney, the part of the brain that controls the kidney actually lights up.
Okay.
So from like a kind of more neurological standpoint, that's what's happening.
Okay.
When you're using essential oils on the reflex points, it's the same idea. You're absorbing all of the goodness that's in the oil or directly into the reflex point. And because it's activating the reflex point the same way that it would be activating the organ is kind of piggybacking off on those benefits. Does that make sense? That's the best way I can explain it. I don't have a super scientific response for you on that one.
No, so like, but what I'm getting from it is like versus just, applying an oil topically and getting the benefits, you're sending it to that specific organ or space in your body?
Basically.
Okay.
So putting lavender over that reflex point, the solar plexus reflex point for the vagus nerve, is really calming, right? Okay. Or like eucalyptus or peppermint over the diaphragm to allow for that sort of lung expansion. Things like that.
Awesome.
Oils are not necessarily, like I use them all the time. I just don't have a whole bunch of knowledge stored in my head about which ones are good for what things.
It's a process.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. we all have unlimited abilities to learn, but like we can only learn so much at once.
Well, and that's kind of what I'm trying to do this week is getting people to identify what it is that's important to them so that that's the thing that they can focus on.
Yeah.
So it's not about giving everybody a list of things that they should do. It's like, look at the broad range of things that all of you have to offer. And like, what one sounds good to you? Like what things do you feel like would be good for you? And for a lot of the people that are asking questions in the background because they're shy or whatever, I find like a lot of them haven't even ever taken the time to ask themselves the questions.
I always say, like, we just have to ask new and better questions to get new and better answers. Like, we have unlimited parts of ourselves that we can meet and things about ourselves that we're not aware of yet. And if we just start to ask different questions, like the journaling that you were talking about earlier, that's one of the beautiful things about journaling is you start to explore different questions that you hadn't asked yourself before, and you learn new things about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to comment. I loved everything that you were talking about. It's so amazing. And I wish I would have said this earlier, but I'm saying it now because it's a perfect example of that. Is like what I kind of talked about is exactly what helped me get through my healing journey was every effing day showing up. Every effing day you just show up because your nervous system learns to change. Like you just change. Everything changes when you learn to stay centered within yourself. But yeah, the journaling and asking questions, because so many people were like, what do I journal about? Like, it's like Dear Diary. That's what they think it's going to be. And I'm like, no, man, it's like, you literally sit down and I'm like, ask yourself, like, as if I'm sitting here with you, well, how are you feeling? Like building a relationship with self is something that so many people, we are literally taught to not do that. Like, it's like, do what society wants us to do. I hate to kind of say that, like, it's not like we're victims, but we are, it's a conditioning that we go through.
We're conditioned to feel like victims. And that's the one thing that I really push people out of is like, you get to choose.
Yeah.
You have this story. Like one thing I wrote down earlier when you were talking was like, what's in the way of reaching your goals? Every single time the answer to that question is the bullshit stories you're telling yourself.
Oh, yes,
yeah.
Every time. So let's figure out why they're there and change them.
Yeah, my girlfriend and I were having this conversation this morning because we're working on a podcast idea, and she was like, I think I'm just coming to this realization that I don't think it's a midlife crisis. I think it's like a big effing awakening. I think you're like, oh my God, I don't need to listen to all of that all these years.
Yes.
I actually just need to like not put everybody else first. I need to actually think about what I want for my life. I need to sit and I'm like, yes, because, and she was like, now it kind of makes sense. I'm like, yes, you got to show up for yourself. You got to like, but we're conditioned that way, but it's reconditioning ourselves and just knowing that it's my dog's like trying to.
That's okay. And that's the beautiful thing about like, if it's been conditioned, it can be, everything that's been conditioned can be undone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not intrinsic, right? I was writing some ideas before I jumped on the call. And one thing that I wrote was like, freedom comes from knowing yourself so intimately that you never have to wonder what you need or how to get it.
Yeah.
And that comes from asking yourself those questions, showing up every day, right? Like knowing that the stories you've allowed yourself to eat up don't have to stay your diet.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm just so happy right now. I love this. Katie, I'll give you the opportunity if you want to. I know you don't want to show your face, but do you want to unmute? Like you have a great opportunity to ask these women some questions or talk about what's going on.
Just takes 20 seconds of insane courage.
Exactly.
Open up, let us in, or don't. You can inbox.
I was doing a group coaching program with this amazing Irish coach, Pat Divilly. Highly recommend everyone check out his podcast.
Sorry, what? Who's that?
Pat Divilly. He's incredible. Changed my life completely. And I was in a group program with him last summer. And speaking of like insane courage, there was this one call I showed up on. It was like 4:00 in the morning because of the time difference.
Right.
And I was a mess. I've never like really allowed myself to be super, up until that point, to be super vulnerable in front of other people. Like it was just this huge wall I had up. I wasn't going to show up messy and start crying. I showed up at 4:00 in the morning on this call. He was like, how are you? And I just like the ugly cry, you know, like my face was crumpled, my shoulders were shaking. And it was the most liberating experience of my life. So whenever people are like hesitant to kind of open up on calls, I tell that story. And I'm like, no, you don't understand how free you feel when you realize you can do that and the world doesn't fall apart.
That's right.
Yeah, I know. And Kate just said, I'm seriously choked up right now. I can't even talk, but I finally realized I'm not alone. Yes. And I think that's one of the biggest things. And I like get goosebumpies when I feel like, yes, that's, if anything you need to understand that it took me time too. Like our mind will convince us that we're so alone in this. And like you getting on there and like, when you finally have that courage to just like, I used to say, I was like, I think I had a breakdown, and I'm like, no, it's a breakthrough. Like it's a breakthrough because you realize that being vulnerable is actually not the worst thing. It's the most courageous thing ever. So yeah, good for you on that. It takes courage though to do that.
And I'm not sure if you guys notice this, but I find a lot of people too, like you need social media as a great example. Like they show this life that's perfect and they have their shit all together, and they're either lying or they don't, and you know they're taking care of their stuff in the background for sure. Mm-hmm. But for those of you who, you know, maybe you don't feel any of the feels that we all have, but there's also this spot we have to think about prevention, because you know something very well could happen that, you know, hurts the nervous system, and you don't want to have to feel completely lost at that point in your life. So all of this advice is something you should at least be thinking about. Like there's got to be something here that you can resonate with, even if it's just a gratitude each day. Like wake up in the morning and think of something to be happy about, so that if and when something happens in your life that feels traumatic to you, then you know a way to cope with it, and then come back to some of these awesome ideas.
Yeah. And another thing just on that note quickly is there isn't an end goal with any of this work, right? Like people tend to have this idea that like they'll reach a certain level and then they are just going to be zen forever. But life still happens, which means the nervous system is still going to be activated and it's going to react. And even if you've healed every potential thing from your past, life can still pop up, right? Scary things can still happen. People can still hurt you, you know, inadvertently, I would argue every time, but that's a whole other conversation. And so things will still be coming up, but the more of a baseline level of calm and self-trust you have, the more gracefully you can like work through that. And I don't mean gracefully as in like not messy. I just mean gracefully as in like self-accepting.
I love it.
And I love that. And I am going to add to that as well, just quickly too, because learning grace was a big thing. Like I felt like I was on this healing journey for so long and I was like, I like got it. It's like, I knew it wasn't an end goal. I knew it was going to be forever, but I was like, I remember I said to when something happened, like completely shocked me, rocked like my foundation. And I was like, well, I didn't plan on that. And I was like, and I messed up and I did this. And I was like, I thought I did so much more work. And she's like, my mentor was like, honey, it never stops. Like this is called grace. Like this is called grace because when you hit those moments of, man, I thought I was like so much, it's like, no, that's where you learn to love yourself in the shit. You're like, no, I'm in a crappy moment right now.
Yeah.
And I need to learn to love myself through this because this wasn't planned. We don't have plans, and surrendering to that. Like you said, we don't have to do it alone. And you can look for a coach or a therapist or like that. Nobody has to do this alone. And the fact that we think that we do, or to keep it private, but having that someone else who can remind you, no, this is where grace steps in. And this is where every other human being goes through the exact same thing as you're going through. And on the other side of crawling through this is even more strength, right? And that it's like, it continues to go and you're like, wow, like I surrendered to it and asked for help. And it's a powerful journey, this healing journey that is, it blows my mind all the time. It's amazing and scary and all of the amazing at once.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And one thing that just came up, and then I swear I'll stop adding one more thing. When, for anyone who is thinking of like reaching out for help or looking for someone to work with, it doesn't necessarily have to be a coach or a counselor. There's loads of different places you can go. But I really do recommend finding someone outside of your current circle or outside of your family. And that's not to say that the people that you're close to aren't amazing and that they can't be a wonderful part of your healing journey or support system, but they are going to be in your norm. That is like, they think the same way as you. So the chances of them challenging you are limited. Family, especially, if they haven't done work to really unpack their own experiences and reactions to things, they're going to be feeding you advice that kind of keeps you in the same trajectory that you were already on, because that was how you got there. And that's not a judgment. It's just an awareness that if you really want to challenge yourself to grow or challenge yourself to think new ways, find someone who's a little bit outside of your current circle or niche.
Oh, I agree. And there's just something different, like having a different, you don't hold anything back because
the objective third party is a beautiful thing.
yeah, like I don't know if you have this feeling that you're getting less judged or whatever, but it's a thing for sure. So I agree with you.